The tray was heavier than it looked. It always was on Friday nights at Rosario's, where the kitchen ran hot and the music ran loud and the tips ran thin unless you smiled like you meant it, which Hadassah Usman had learned to do even when her feet were screaming through the soles of her shoes and her lower back had filed a formal complaint somewhere around the 4th hour of her shift. She balanced 3 entrees, a bread basket, and 2 glasses of Cabernet on her forearm the way a circus performer balances spinning plates, through muscle memory, through necessity, through the quiet pride of a woman who refused to drop anything, literally or otherwise. She was 28 years old, 5'6", with natural hair she kept pinned back on work nights and the kind of cheekbones her grandmother used to cup with both hands and call God's own work. She had a laugh that started slow and then took over a room before anyone realized it had arrived. She had a daughter at home, 7 years old, named Zola, currently being watched by Mrs. Pemberton next door, who charged $15 an hour and didn't accept Venmo. She had a university acceptance letter pinned to her refrigerator under a magnet shaped like the Eiffel Tower that Zola had picked out at a garage sale, believing with complete certainty that one day they would go there together. She had $2,200 left to pay before that acceptance became an enrollment. She had tonight. Table 9 is asking about the risotto, her coworker Deja said, blowing past her toward the bar with the efficiency of a woman who had perfected the art of moving fast in heels. And table 4 wants to speak to someone about their steak. Someone meaning a manager. Someone meaning you, because Marcus is in the walk-in avoiding both the health inspector and his feelings. Hadassah almost smiled. Almost. She redirected, handled table 4 with the warmth of a woman who genuinely cared about the quality of their dining experience and not at all about the 30-second detour it cost her, charmed them back from the edge of a 1-star review, and returned to the floor with the kind of calm that only comes from having weathered far worse. What had she weathered? Let her count. A father who left when she was 11 and sent birthday cards for 3 years before those 2 stopped arriving. A teenage pregnancy that her church, her neighbors, and her own mother had treated like a verdict rather than a circumstance. A man, Zola's father Damien, who had loved her loudly and publicly until the moment loving her became expensive, and then had loved her not at all. A miscarriage at 23 that she had never fully spoken about to anyone. An eviction notice last April that she had paid off by selling the one piece of jewelry her grandmother had left her, a small gold bracelet with her name engraved in Twi script. She was still standing. That was the only way she knew how to count. The restaurant hummed around her, candles flickered in their glass holders. The Coltrane album the owner insisted on playing on Fridays floated over the sound of silverware and conversation. Hadassah moved through it all like water through a landscape, present, responsive, shaped by everything around her but not broken by any of it. She didn't notice the man at table 12 until he'd been there 40 minutes. Not because he was unremarkable. He was, in fact, the opposite of unremarkable, which was precisely why it took her so long to look directly at him, the same instinct that keeps you from staring straight into a light source. He was tall, even-seated, with a face that seemed to have been assembled by someone who took the assignment seriously. Dark skin, close-cropped hair, a jaw that could have been borrowed from a sculpture. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie and the top button undone, which on most men would have looked careless but on him looked intentional in the way that everything about him looked intentional, including the way he sat, not slouched, not stiff but settled. Like a man who had long ago made peace with taking up space. He was alone, no phone on the table, no laptop, just a glass of water and the menu which he had not opened. Hadassah approached because table 12 was hers, and that was all it was. "Good evening," she said. "Can I start you off with something to drink while you look over the menu?" He looked up. There was a pause, not awkward, not loaded, just present. The kind of pause where two people register each other at a frequency slightly above the ordinary. "Water's fine," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't raise itself to be heard but somehow always was. I already know what I want. Of course, she lifted her notepad. Go ahead. He ordered the salmon. Simple. No substitutions, no modifications, no performance. She wrote it down and turned to go, and then he said quietly, long night. She stopped. In 7 years of waitressing, she had learned to categorize the men who asked personal questions at restaurants. There were the ones who did it to feel charming, the ones who did it out of boredom, the ones who did it because they mistook service for invitation. And then rarely there were the ones who asked because they had simply noticed something true and said it out loud. She turned back around. Is it that obvious? Your left shoulder, he said. You dropped it about 3 inches between the door and here. You're compensating for something you've been carrying. She blinked. That's either very observant or very strange. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the suggestion of one, probably both. She went to put in the order. At the waitress station, Deja was watching her with the particular attention of a woman who cataloged everything. Table 12, Deja said. What about him? Ezra Mensah. The name landed on Hadassah like a stone dropped into still water. She felt the ripple before she fully registered the impact. Ezra Mensah was not a name you didn't know if you lived in this city, if you read a newspaper, if you had ever glanced at a business section or a Forbes list, and this was the version most people knew him by, the cover of a magazine 18 months ago with the headline, "The Youngest Black Billionaire in American History." He had built something in logistics and technology that people described in ways Hadassah had never fully understood because the explanations always involved words like infrastructure and ecosystem and paradigm, but the results were concrete enough. He was 34 years old. He had started with nothing, genuinely nothing, immigrant parents, a scholarship, a dorm room, and he had built something that moved goods across 5 continents and employed 11,000 people and was currently worth, depending on which source you consulted, somewhere between $3 and $4 billion. He also, according to the magazine article that Deja had apparently memorized, had not been photographed with a woman in over 2 years. Not since his engagement had ended, quietly and without public explanation, to a woman named Celeste who now appeared to be thriving on Instagram in a way that suggested the breakup had been, for at least one of them, a relief. He comes in alone sometimes, Deja said, as if she had been monitoring this. Never takes a table for more than an hour, always tips 30%. You've had him before. Once he barely talked. Deja tilted her head toward the floor. He talked to you. Hadassah delivered the salmon with professional composure. Ezra Mensah thanked her. She refilled his water. He ate. She managed the rest of her section. This was the entirety of what happened for the next 40 minutes, and she told herself that was the correct and appropriate way for it to continue. Then table 12 signaled for the check. She brought it. He signed it without looking at the total, which was either the confidence of wealth or the focus of a man who had already decided the number was irrelevant. As she reached to collect the folder, he said, "Do you have a minute?" She almost said no. She should have said no. She had 4 other tables and Mrs. Pemberton was watching the clock. 1 minute, she said. He folded his hands on the table. You were pre-med, he said, or pre-law, something that required real work. You're here because something interrupted it, not because this is where you plan to be. The sentence landed somewhere between a question and a statement, and neither option felt comfortable. That's a significant assumption, she said. It's an observation. The way you explain the preparation method of the salmon to table 4, they asked a simple question and you gave a complete answer. You know how to construct an argument. You care about being accurate. He paused. I'm not trying to reduce you. I'm trying to say you're operating well below what you're capable of. The room had not changed. The Coltrane was still playing, candles still burning, but something in the air between them had shifted, and Hadassah felt it with the physical certainty of a weather change. I'm going back to school, she said, and she heard the defensiveness in her own voice and hated it. In the fall, health administration. What's standing between you and fall? She looked at him. Why are you asking me this? Because you interest me, he said it without performance. Without the loaded quality it might have carried from someone else. Just plainly like a man who had learned that the most honest thing to do with a true thought was say it. And I find that I don't encounter that often enough to ignore it when I do. She left the table, not rudely, with composure, but she left. What are the moments in your life when a stranger saw you more clearly than the people closest to you ever did? Drop your answer in the comments, I want to hear it. She thought about him for 6 days. She didn't want to. She had a daughter to pack lunches for, and a landlord who had started adding passive-aggressive notes to the rent receipts, and a coworker at the breakfast shift who called out sick every Thursday like clockwork and left Hadassah covering a double. She had textbooks to review before fall. She had a phone call to return from her mother, which she kept not returning because her mother had a gift for asking how Hadassah was doing in a tone that made the question feel like an accusation. She thought about him anyway. Not in the breathless, romantic way she might have thought about a man when she was younger, and the word billionaire would have done something wild to her imagination. She thought about him in a more unsettling way, the way you think about something that is named a truth you had been keeping quiet. You're operating well below what you're capable of. She had carried that sentence the way she carried the tray that night, with the muscles that had been built specifically for the weight of things nobody else saw. Zola found her distracted on Sunday morning and climbed into her lap with the physical confidence of a child who has never once doubted her welcome. You're thinking loud again, Zola said. Am. You get a line. The child touched her mother's forehead between the brows with one finger. Right here's like a little road. Hadassah pulled her daughter closer and pressed her face into the warm mass of her hair and breathed. Zola smelled like the strawberry shampoo they bought at the dollar store and like something else beneath that, something indefinable and specific that Hadassah had cataloged from the first hour of her daughter's life, her child's own particular scent, the one that meant home and mine and still here. What are you thinking about? Zola asked. The future, Hadassah said. Is it good? I'm working on it. Zola considered this with the seriousness of a 7-year-old who has learned that some answers are not yes or no but something in between that takes time. Then she said, Mrs. Pemberton says you're the hardest working person she's ever met. Mrs. Pemberton tells you that. She says it to her cat, I hear through the wall. Hadassah laughed, the real one, the one that started slow and then took over. Zola looked pleased with herself. When Hadassah walked into Rosario's the following Friday, she was not expecting him. He was at a different table this time, not 12 but a corner booth near the window, and he was not alone. A man sat across from him with a laptop and a stack of folders, the physical manifestation of a business meeting that should have been happening somewhere with better lighting and a conference room. They were deep in conversation. Ezra Mensah had not looked up when she walked in. She was assigned to the opposite section. She told herself this was fine. Better, even. The week had given her perspective. He was a man who had said an interesting thing to a waitress at the end of a long night, and she had given it more weight than it deserved because she was tired and her shoulder hurt and she was $2,200 away from the beginning of a different life. That was the whole story. She believed this until approximately 9:45, when the man with the laptop left and Ezra Mensah stayed, and Marcus, in a move that Hadassah would later suspect was not entirely coincidental, told her to take the window tables because Deja had gone home with a migraine. She walked to the corner booth with the deliberate calm of a woman who had decided something. Mr. Mensah, she said, which was the first time she had used his name, can I get you anything else this evening? He looked up. Something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not obviously, but she caught it the way you catch a change in wind direction. Awareness. You know who I am, he said. I Googled you. And And I'm still not sure why you told me what you told me last week. He was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone who didn't have an answer, but the silence of someone deciding how honest to be. Because I meant it, he said, and I'm not in the habit of keeping things I mean to myself. He gestured to the seat across from him. Sit down, 2 minutes. I'm working. I know, sit down anyway. It was the quiet certainty of it, not arrogance. She knew arrogance, she had served it in a dozen shapes, but something more settled. She sat. I want to offer you something, he said. A scholarship through the Mensa Foundation, full tuition, stipend, childcare support for enrolled single parents. He paused. Your acceptance letter, fall enrollment, health administration at Carver University. Am I right? She went very still. How do you know that? I looked you up too. He held her gaze steady. I have 2 conditions. First, you accept it on the Foundation's standard terms, not as a personal favor. It goes through the proper channels, the committee approves it, same as every other candidate. Second, you have coffee with me this week, not as a recipient and a donor, just 2 people. The world had a way of offering things that looked like gifts but arrived wrapped in conditions she had learned through experience to examine carefully. She studied his face. He did not look away. Why the coffee, she said. Because I'd like to continue the conversation we started last Friday. A pause. You interest me, Hadassah. I said it before, I mean it more now. She drove home that night with her hands steady on the wheel, and her mind doing the thing it did when the ground shifted, running calculations, checking exits, testing the weight of the new thing against the framework of everything she already knew. Mrs. Pemberton was asleep on the couch when she got in, mouth slightly open, the television murmuring. Zola was in her bed with one arm flung out the way she always slept, as if even in dreams she was reaching for something. Hadassah stood in the doorway of her daughter's room for a long time. Then she went to the kitchen and opened her laptop and typed an email to the Mensa Foundation's public inquiry address. Professional, grateful, asking about the application process. She told herself that was all it was. What does it feel like when someone offers you a hand up and you can't decide whether to trust it? Let us know what you think in the comments. The coffee was at a place called Birch, which was small and unfussy and served things in ceramic cups that had clearly been made by someone's hands rather than a machine. Ezra was already there when she arrived, which she noted as a small but deliberate thing. A man who arrives before you is a man who didn't want you to wait. He stood when she came in. She had almost not come. She had stood in her bathroom that morning applying mascara and had a full internal argument about every possible interpretation of what this was and what it could become and what she could not afford to let it become. And she had arrived at the same conclusion she always arrived at when the thing in front of her was uncertain. You walk toward it with your eyes open, or you walk away with your eyes closed, and only one of those is living. She wore a green dress she had bought 2 years ago for a job interview she hadn't gotten. It fit differently now, more confidently somehow, as if she had grown into it. They talked for 2 hours. Not about money, not about the scholarship, not about his foundation or his company or the Forbes list. He asked about her, about Zola, about health administration, about what had drawn her to it. She told him about the summer she was 15 when her grandmother had been admitted to a hospital and discharged 3 times before anyone caught the infection that was quietly killing her, and how Hadassah had sat in those waiting rooms watching the administrative chaos, the lost charts, the miscommunication between departments. The families who didn't know what questions to ask, and had decided with the certainty of a teenager who has just watched something preventable unfold that systems could be fixed by people who cared enough to fix them. He listened the way rare people listen, completely, without performance, without the busy stillness of someone composing their response while you speak. He told her about his parents. His mother had come from Ghana with $40 and a contact name scrawled on a piece of paper. His father had worked 2 jobs for 9 years without complaint, the way men of a certain generation absorb difficulty quietly without expecting acknowledgement. They were both alive, he called them every Sunday. He went quiet for a moment after he said this, and she understood the quiet because she recognized it. It was the weight of knowing how much you owe the people who made you possible. "You're different in person than what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "I'm not sure, someone who needed the room to know he was in it." He tilted his head slightly. "I spent a long time being invisible, then I spent a long time being very visible for the wrong reasons. Neither felt like home." He looked at her directly. "I'm still figuring out what home feels like." She looked down at her cup. The ceramic was warm against her palms. "Me too," she said softly. They walked out into the afternoon together and stood on the sidewalk in the particular suspended moment where neither person wants to be the first to leave. The sun was at an angle that made everything look golden and slightly unreal. A child on a bicycle rang a bell somewhere down the block. Hadassah thought, "I will remember this." "I'd like to see you again," Ezra said. "Not as a donor, not as a stranger at a restaurant, just," he stopped, looked for the right word, "as whatever we are." "We don't know what we are," she said. "No," a small smile, real this time, "that's the interesting part." The Foundation's scholarship committee approved her application on a Tuesday. She found out by email, official and warm, and signed by the executive director. She sat with her phone in her hand for a full 3 minutes, not moving. Then she called her mother. Her mother cried, the good kind, the complicated kind, the kind that contains "I knew you would," and "I'm sorry it took this long" in the same breath without either being spoken aloud. They stayed on the phone for 40 minutes. It was the most honest conversation they'd had in years. She and Ezra had dinner the following week. Then a walk along the waterfront the week after that, Zola unexpectedly in tow because Mrs. Pemberton had a family visit and Hadassah had almost canceled until Ezra said, "Bring her, I'd like to meet her." Zola had assessed Ezra Mensah with the direct, unfiltered gaze of a 7-year-old who had inherited her mother's ability to read a room. She had asked him 3 questions in succession. Did he have a dog? What was his favorite color? Could he do a cartwheel? He could not do a cartwheel, he told her. He had tried once and it had not gone well. Zola had found this satisfying. They had walked the waterfront with Zola between them, holding both their hands periodically and swinging herself forward with the joyful recklessness of a child who has decided someone is safe. On the walk back to the car, when Zola was ahead chasing a pigeon with the pure commitment of someone who believes this time she'll catch one, Ezra said quietly, "She's extraordinary." "I know," Hadassah said. "She has your eyes." "She has her own eyes, I just passed them on." He looked at her in a way that she was still, weeks into knowing him, learning how to receive fully without deflection, without the armor she had spent years constructing. She let herself look back. "I haven't felt like this in a long time," he said. "I want you to know that, whatever this is, it isn't casual for me." "It isn't casual for me either," she said. "Which is precisely why I need you to be honest with me about everything." He met her eyes. "That I can promise." 3 months is both a long time and nothing at all. It is long enough to learn someone's coffee order and the way they rub the back of their neck when they're thinking and the specific silence they fall into when they're worried but don't want to say so. It is short enough that you are still discovering, still surprised, still finding rooms in a person you didn't know existed. Hadassah had begun her program at Carver in September. She went to class 2 evenings a week and online the rest, and she kept 1 weekend shift at Rosario's because she believed in not letting go of things that had held her until she had something else firmly in her hand. Zola was in 2nd grade. She had made a best friend named Precious and brought her home so often that Hadassah had started buying an extra juice box. She and Ezra had become, she didn't have a clean word for it, not boyfriend and girlfriend, which sounded thin for what was between them, not partners, which sounded like a business arrangement. Something that didn't have a word yet, which was perhaps the most accurate description of something still becoming itself. She had met his parents on a Sunday afternoon that she had spent the entire previous week trying not to catastrophize. His mother, Aliner, had taken one look at Hadassah and said, in Twi, "She has a good face." His father, Bernard, had shaken her hand with both of his and offered her the best chair. She had been terrified. She had been, underneath the terror, quietly radiant with something she didn't name yet. The word she wasn't nomming had a shape, though. It lived in the way she drove home after evenings with him, and the car felt warmer than it had before. In the way she mentioned him to Zola casually, and Zola stopped her and said, "You're doing it again." Doing what? Smiling when you're not trying to. She was smiling when she wasn't trying to. That was the word she wasn't nomming. She was also somewhere in the basement of her caution, waiting for the other shoe. Because shoes drop. Because she was Hadassah Usman, 28 years old, daughter of a woman who had loved men who left, mother of a child whose father had evaporated, holder of a gold bracelet she no longer had. Because good things in her experience had a habit of revealing their cost after you had already fallen in love with them. She didn't have to wait long. She found out on a Wednesday evening, not from Ezra, but from Deja, who had the particular talent of knowing things before they were public knowledge. Deja had been on her phone in the break room and looked up with an expression that Hadassah recognized immediately, the expression of someone who has information they don't want to deliver. "There's something going around," Deja said. "I don't know if it's true." "What is it?" Deja turned the phone around. It was a gossip blog, the kind that cloaked its cruelty in the language of transparency. There was a photo, Ezra at some event, and beside him a woman Hadassah recognized without wanting to, Celeste, his former fiancée. The caption suggested the reconciliation. The article was constructed from sources close to the couple and industry insiders, and the other linguistic scaffolding that meant we don't actually know, but in a tone that implied certainty. There was a second photo. Ezra and Celeste at a dinner 2 weeks ago, while Hadassah had been studying for her midterm. He had been at a dinner. He had not mentioned the dinner. She put the phone down very carefully. "Hadassah." "I'm fine," she said, and she was standing. The floor was beneath her feet, the lights were on. She drove home. She gave Zola her bath. She read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through together. She waited until Zola was asleep, and then she sat at her kitchen table and felt the specific anatomical grief of someone who had let their guard down and been reminded why they put it up in the first place. She did not call Ezra. He called her. She let it ring. He texted, "Can we talk?" She turned her phone face down and went to bed. Tell us in the comments, have you ever pulled away from someone before they could pull away from you, because you were too afraid of what was coming? The silence lasted 4 days. 4 days during which she went to class and worked her shift and made Zola's lunches and smiled when she needed to smile and held everything together in the way that she had always, without exception, held everything together. She was very good at this. She had built the skill across years of practice, and she deployed it now with the efficiency of someone who had no alternative. On the 5th day, Ezra appeared at Rosario's. Not at a table, at the door. He spoke to Marcus, who came to find her with the expression of a man who wanted very much to not be involved in whatever this was. "Someone's asking for you," Marcus said. "Outside." She considered not going. She considered it seriously, stood there for a full count of 10 behind the line of vision from the door, running through the arithmetic of all the reasons she should make him wait or make him leave or make him understand through absence what she couldn't seem to say with presence. Then she went. He was standing on the sidewalk, no jacket despite the October chill, and when she came through the door he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, not the composed, unhurried certainty that was his default, but something stripped of that. Raw almost. The face of someone who had spent 4 days in the same basement she had been in and understood finally what was down there. "The dinner," he said, with Celeste. "You don't owe me an explanation." She heard her own voice, steady and cool and exactly the distance she needed it to be. We never established." "Stop, not sharp but definitive. Please don't do that, don't make what we are less than what it is." She looked away. "It was a board meeting," he said. "Celeste sits on the Foundation's advisory board. She has for 2 years. I didn't tell you about it because he stopped, ran a hand over his face. "I should have told you. I thought if I mentioned her name it would create a question I didn't know how to answer yet, and instead I created a silence that created a far worse question." He paused. "There is nothing between Celeste and me. There hasn't been for 2 years. What ended completely. I need you to know that." "How do I know that?" "You ask me and I answer, that's how." He took a step toward her, not closing the distance entirely but reducing it. "I told you I would be honest with you. I failed that. I'm standing here telling you I failed it so you can decide what you want to do with that information. But I am not," his jaw tight. "I am not willing to lose this without a fight. You are someone I have been looking for without knowing I was looking. And I need you to not decide that we're over based on a photograph on a blog that doesn't know what we are." The street was quiet around them. A car passed, a light changed somewhere. "I have a daughter," she said, and her voice cracked on it, finally, the crack. She can't if I let her get attached and then." "I know," he said, and then quietly, "I'm attached too, Hadassah, that's the whole point." She put her hand over her mouth. She would not cry on the sidewalk outside her workplace. She had rules about this. She cried on the sidewalk outside her workplace. He didn't reach for her immediately. He let her have the cry, which was the right thing to do and which she registered even through it, the instinct of a man who understood that sometimes you don't comfort someone by trying to stop the thing they need to release. When it passed, the sharp initial wave of it, the breaking open, he stepped forward and she didn't move away, and then his arms were around her and she pressed her forehead against his chest and breath. "I'm not going anywhere," he said into the top of her head, "unless you send me away, and even then I'm going to need a direct order." She laughed, wet and unsteady. "That's not how sending people away works." "For me it is." November came, then December with its particular texture of cold and light, and Zola's escalating excitement about the holidays that peaked absurdly at the discovery that Ezra had a house with a fireplace. "A real one?" she had demanded. "When you can put logs in." He had confirmed this with the gravity the question deserved. Zola had told Precious about the fireplace the next day with the pride of someone reporting their own accomplishment. It was at that house, on a Sunday evening in early December with snow drifting outside and the fire Zola had been promised burning steadily, and Zola asleep on the couch under a blanket with the boneless trust of a child who knows she is safe, that Ezra said the thing he said. They were in the kitchen. Hadassah was washing a mug she didn't need to wash, just because her hands wanted something to do in the warm, comfortable nearness of him. He was leaning against the counter watching her with the quiet attention that she had come to understand as his version of tenderness, the kind that doesn't demand to be noticed, that just stays. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the future." She set the mug on the drying rack. "What kind of thinking?" "The kind that involves you specifically," he paused. "The kind that involves all of it, the rest of it." She turned to look at him. He was not nervous, exactly, but he was something open in the way that you only become when you've decided to put everything down in front of someone and let them see it without the protection of composure. "I haven't let myself want what I actually want in a long time," he said. "Not since," he stopped, found his footing. "Not since my engagement ended. I thought I was choosing something when I chose Celeste. I think now I was choosing who I thought I should be rather than who I am." He looked at Hadassah. "You make me who I am, not who I should be. Do you understand the difference?" "I think so," she said softly. "I want a family," he said. Not the idea of one, an actual one. I want Zola to grow up in a house full of people who love her, and he exhaled. I want to build that with you, whatever that takes, however long that takes. He looked at her with a directness that had no performance in it, nothing calculated, just a man who had looked directly at the thing he wanted and decided to stop looking away from it. You'll carry my child one day, he said, not a demand. Not a promise you have to answer right now, just the truest thing I know how to say to you, the future I'm asking for. The kitchen was warm, the fire was in the other room. Outside, the snow had picked up. Hadassah stood completely still and felt something move through her, not fear, though that was there too at the edges, but something deeper and more durable. The feeling of a door opening in a house she had been standing outside of for years. The specific sensation of being seen entirely and chosen entirely, and the terror and the beauty of those two things arriving at the same time. You're asking a lot, she said. I know. I'm still in school, Zola is 7, I don't know who I'm going to be in 5 years. I know I want to find out with you. She pressed her lips together, I have been let down by people I trusted with less than this. I know, he said, and I am asking you to trust me anyway, not because I've earned it yet, but because I intend to, every day, for however many days it takes. She crossed the kitchen. She stood in front of him. She took his face in her hands, this impossible, careful, certain man, and she looked at him for a long moment without speaking, reading the geography of him, the truth of him. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him, slow and full and sure. When she pulled back, he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on anyone before, the expression of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has just remembered that the air is safe. Ask me again in 2 years, she said. He smiled, the full one, the one that changed his whole face. I'll ask you every year until you say yes. That's either very romantic or very persistent. Probably both. If someone said something to you that changed everything, not dramatically but quietly, permanently, what were the words? Leave it in the comments. I truly want to know. Spring arrived the way it always does, without announcement, as if it had been there all along and the world had simply stopped arguing with it. The trees on Carver's campus put out their early green. Zola lost her first tooth and placed it under her pillow with the solemn ceremony of a child who has done extensive research on the process. Hadassah submitted her first major research paper on interoperability in healthcare systems and received an A- with a note from her professor that said, "This is graduate-level thinking. Consider the thesis track." She framed that note, not literally, but internally she pressed it behind glass and put it somewhere prominent. Ezra had been in Singapore for 8 days for a series of meetings she knew nothing about until he was back and exhausted, and called her from the airport at 11 at night sounding like a man who had forgotten what sleep was. She had been awake because Zola had a nightmare and she had climbed into Hadassah's bed and was now arranged across 2/3 of it like a small decorative starfish. How was it? She said into the phone. Productive, he said, necessary long, a pause, I missed you. 8 days, she said, you survived. Barely, she could hear the smile in it, how's my girl? She's taking up 90% of my bed and stealing all the heat. I meant you, he said, but I'm glad she's there. She closed her eyes, we're good, she said, we're really good. There had been, in those 8 days, a clarity that absence sometimes gives, the particular way that a space reveals the shape of what usually fills it. She had gone about her week, her daughter, her classes, her single remaining shift at Rosario's, which she had formally announced she was leaving at the end of the semester, and she had moved through it all with the ground solidly beneath her feet and the future solidly in view and Ezra Mentz's number in her phone and his voice in her memory, and his words from that December kitchen living in her chest like a small permanent warmth. She thought about the woman she had been a year ago, the tray, the shoulder, The $2,200 and the Eiffel Tower magnet and the letter on the refrigerator that had felt like a door she was on the wrong side of. She thought about what it means to be seen, not fixed, not rescued, not corrected, simply seen, by someone with clear eyes and no agenda at a moment when you have stopped expecting it. She thought about trust, about the architecture of it, not the dramatic act of bestowing it, but the quiet daily practice of not taking it back. The choice you make in the morning and again at noon and again in the evening when old fears whisper their familiar language. She had been making that choice every day. It was the hardest thing she had ever done and the most worthwhile. Summer was yellow and full. Zola turned 8 and had a birthday party in Ezra's backyard, which was the size of a small park and had a fountain, which had been the subject of weeks of anticipation, with Precious and 4 other children and Mrs. Pemberton and Deja and Ezra's mother Alina, who had brought rice and stew in quantities that suggested she had once fed a village and had not yet adjusted her portions. Bernard had brought a kite and spent 40 minutes at the edge of the yard trying to get it airborne with the quiet determination of a man who does not accept defeat from inanimate objects. Hadza stood at the edge of it all, this noise, this fullness, this specific improbable joy, and watched her daughter run through the sprinkler in the July heat and scream with the absolute unself-conscious delight of a child whose world contains exactly what she needs in it. Ezra came to stand beside her. "She got your laugh," he said. "Told you she has her own everything. That she inherited from you." She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. "I've been thinking," she said. He waited. "About what you said in December." She felt him go very still beside her, not tense, just attentive. The particular stillness of someone who has been hopping for something without allowing themselves to count on it. "I'm not ready to say yes to the specific question you were asking," she said. "I want you to know that clearly. I'm still in school. There's still a lot of becoming to do." "I know," he said quietly. "But I wanted to tell you that I'm not afraid of it anymore." She looked up at him. "The idea of it, the future of it." She paused. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved across his face, relief and tenderness, and something else, something quieter and more profound, the expression of a man receiving a gift he had not dared to name. "That's everything," he said. "Don't get greedy." He laughed. She felt it against her. Across the yard, Zola had found the kite and was helping Bernard with the launch in a way that mostly involved shouting instructions that may or may not have been physically accurate. The kite caught the air in a sudden gust and climbed, wobbling, then steadying, then rising with the complete conviction of something that had waited a long time to be where it was always meant to be. Hadza watched it go. She thought about her grandmother's hands cupping her face. She thought about hospital waiting rooms and acceptance letters and gold bracelets and the particular weight of trays at the end of long nights. She thought about every version of herself that had brought her to this yard, this afternoon, this shoulder beneath her head and this specific quality of light. She was 29 years old. She was registered for her second year at Carver University. She was leaving Rosario's at the end of the month. She had a daughter who was screaming joyfully in a backyard fountain and a man beside her who had said, "I intend to earn it," and had proceeded quietly daily to do exactly that. She was not finished becoming. She was, she understood now, never going to be finished becoming. That was not a deficit but a gift, not an incompletion but a direction. The ongoing proof that she was still moving, still building, still alive to the extraordinary ordinary fact of a future that kept opening, kept making room, kept insisting on the next thing and the next thing and the next. The kite climbed higher. "Good," she thought, "keep going. What's the thing you've been too afraid to want out loud? The future you keep talking yourself out of? Write it in the comments. Today might be the day you say it for the first time. And if this story moved you at all, share it with someone who needs to hear it. you never know whose tray is too heavy tonight and who just needs to know that someone sees them.